Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is invoke. Let's take a look at some of the definitions for this verb. One way you might hear the verb invoke used is to mean to appeal to someone or something as an authority for an action or in support of an argument. If you've been following the news this last week, I think there's a good chance you have heard this word used. It connects to the attack on the U.S. Capitol and what punishment might exist or what consequences might exist for those individuals who encouraged or incited the violence. We'll look at an example of that usage later, and we'll talk you're going to get a little bit of a civics lesson, I think, with today's verb. So let's look at a couple more meanings, though. So invoke could also be used in connection to religion, and that's our second definition, to call on a deity in prayer. So I think of like invoking God's name. A third way to use invoke is to mean to call earnestly for something. And a fourth way you might hear invoke used is to mean to give rise to something. You might think of this as like causing something else. You should know that invoke is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're going to drop the E and then add ing. That forms invoking. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by just adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. If you listen to the base verb, invoke, it's ending with this K sound, so our past tense ending is going to make a T sound. Invoked, invoked. You'll be happy to know there are no additional meanings or phrasal verbs that use invoke. So that will allow us to go to our sample sentences and do some verb tense practice. Today, we'll look at the simple present and the simple future. Let's start with the simple present. We use this to talk about our habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. The thing that is maybe a little bit tricky in the affirmative is that if our subject is he, she, or it, we need to add an S to this base verb to form invokes. But if our subject is just I, you, we, or they, you're just going to use the base verb, and you'll see that in the example sentence in the affirmative here. Their prayers invoke divine intervention. And I know intervention might be a new word for you, so I made a little note to think of that as like help. This is connecting to that second meaning, calling upon a deity. So if I want to make a sentence negative in the simple present, what I'm going to do is use do not in the base verb when the subjects are I, you, we, or they, or I'll use does not in the base verb when the subject is he, she, or it. Let's look at another example. Missing a problem doesn't invoke any anger from the teacher. So what this sentence is suggesting is invoke here is like cause, that fourth definition we looked at earlier. So if a student misses a problem, it's not going to cause the teacher to be angry. Now let's make a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, we're going to start with do or does, then we'll have our subject, and then we'll use the base verb. Now, in my example question here, I'm going to have kind of a long subject, and I'll explain it in a second, but let's read the sentence first. Do many people who are arrested invoke their right to remain silent? So in the United States, if someone is arrested, they are not required to talk to police and explain their behavior. They can make that decision. But they can, again, going back to that first definition of appealing to authority, there are laws, essentially, that allow individuals to say nothing, so that they are invoking their right to remain silent. Now, let's take a look at the simple future. Today, we're going to use be, going, to, and the base verb to make the simple future. This is really common when we discuss plans for the future. So the only thing that's a little bit tricky is watching our form of be. So if our subject is I'm going to use am. But if the subject is you, we, or they, I'm going to use are, A-R-E. And then if the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use is. So those things will change just a little bit, but then the structure after that will continue to be the same. Going to and the base verb. So let's look at another example sentence. We are going to invoke our fans to name the new Crayola crayon color. So this was a sentence I pulled from a news article kind of announcing that this particular company makes coloring crayons that commonly used by children, wanted their input in naming a new color. Let's look now at making a negative simple future sentence. To do this, we need to insert not after the base verb. We cannot make a contraction with am and not, but we can with is not, that can become isn't, or are not, that can become aren't. And you might hear native speakers use those contractions. And my example sentence here is the main reason I picked invoke as our verb of the day today. So here's the sentence. The vice president isn't going to invoke the 25th Amendment. And if you haven't read much about this, don't worry. I made a note down at the bottom of the screen that will hopefully help you understand this a little bit. So after the president encouraged people to attack the Capitol, to break in, to try and stop our democratic process, there are many people who said the president is no longer fit to serve, to be the president. And we have, as part of the United States Constitution, an amendment, and I put the text there, and I tried to simplify it a little bit. That's why you'll see the little brackets there. But essentially, what this rule says, if the vice president and most of his cabinet, so the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, etc., those individuals, most of them, communicate to the Senate and to the House of Representatives that they do not believe that the president is capable of doing the work of president, then the president can be removed from office, and the vice president would then become the president. So many people have expressed their support for the current vice president to invoke or use this authority to remove the current U.S. president. He has recently announced that he is not going to do this. And that's, I made a little edit this morning to this example sentence due to that. So I hope that helps with your understanding just a little bit. So lastly, let's make a question in the simple future. So if we're going to use be going to do this, we're going to start with our be verb. So again, am, is, are. Then we'll have our subject, then going to, and our base verb invoke. So our sentence here should be, is the judge going to invoke the national security interests in her ruling? So again, the idea here is the judge going to appeal to this particular authority, use the authority as part of her decision. Now, there aren't a great deal of words, especially words I think you'll encounter that are related to our verb invoke. So I thought I would point out ReInvoke, which another good reminder about prefixes in English. Re generally means to do again, and so to ReInvoke would be to invoke again. So again, you might hear this sort of connected or used in legal settings or in situations that involve the law. And that's going to be the example sentence here. Will the government ReInvoke the law that freezes funds to terrorist groups? So it might have been used once and for some reason stopped, and now they're asking again to use it again. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.